In the blood-soaked mud of World War I, where bullets tore through silence and men vanished into smoke, one patrol would vanish for a reason no one could explain. Not until Lieutenant Thomas Harding and his demolition team were sent to destroy a bridge that, on every map, shouldn't have survived the war. But the bridge wasn't untouched by chance. It was protected by something that watches from the trees, something that howls like a beast, but thinks like a soldier. What they found beyond the fog wasn't the enemy they trained for. It was the future of warfare, engineered in shadows, fueled by blood, and waiting to hunt again. This is not the story you'll find in any history book. This is the story of the Silent Howl. I never believed in monsters until the autumn of 1914, when the mud of Belgium taught me that some horrors are too real for disbelief. My name is Lieutenant Thomas Harding, and what I'm about to tell you happened during the Battle of Mons, though no official record will ever acknowledge it. The rain drummed against the canvas walls of our forward command post like skeletal fingers, tapping an endless rhythm. October in Belgium meant mud that sucked at your boots and cold that crept through your bones, settling there like a permanent ache. The oil lamps flickered with each gust of wind that found its way through the tent flaps, casting dancing shadows across the mud-stained maps spread before Major Blackwood's weathered desk. I could taste the cordite in the air, sharp and metallic, mixed with the ever-present smell of wet earth and unwashed men. The constant rumble of artillery fire rolled across the landscape like distant thunder, a sound that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat after 3 months on the Western Front. Harding. Major Blackwood's voice cut through the ambient noise of war. His face, carved by years of military service and too many sleepless nights, betrayed nothing as he slid a set of tactical maps toward me. You're to take 4 men and destroy the railway bridge at coordinates 7-4-Alpha. German advance units are 12 hours out, and we cannot let them use that crossing. I leaned forward, studying the route marked in red ink. The bridge sat in an isolated sector, roughly 8 kilometers northeast of our position. What struck me immediately was the gap in our intelligence reports. No Allied forces had reported from that area in 48 hours. Sir, what happened to the patrol scheduled for sector reconnaissance? I asked, my finger tracing the empty space on the tactical map. Blackwood's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Missing. Probably captured or killed. That's why this mission is critical, Lieutenant. We need that bridge destroyed before dawn. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I'd handpicked my demolition team months ago, and each man had proven himself under fire. Sergeant Harry Mitchell, a grizzled veteran whose skeptical gray eyes had seen everything the war could throw at him. Corporal Jimmy O'Connor, whose Irish superstitions had somehow kept him alive through 3 major engagements. Private Billy Thompson, barely 19, but eager to prove himself worthy of the uniform. And Private Eddie Barnes, who clutched his prayer book like a shield against the godless war surrounding us. The demolition charges are ready, I said, mentally calculating the timeline. We'll move out at 3 a.m. See that you do. Blackwood's voice carried that particular tone of command that brooked no argument. Destroy the bridge and get back alive, Harding. That's an order. As I gathered the maps and prepared to brief my men, a commotion outside the tent made us both look up. A soldier stumbled through the entrance, his uniform torn and caked with mud that looked suspiciously dark in the lamplight. His eyes held that 1,000-yard stare I'd seen too often lately. Sir, the soldier gasped, swaying on his feet. Reporting from the bridge sector. Major Blackwood was on his feet instantly. What's your unit designation, soldier? Private Collins, sir. Advance reconnaissance. His voice shook like autumn leaves. "We went out yesterday to survey the bridge. Found something there." Gray shadows moving between the trees. Eyes like burning coals, watching us from the darkness. The Major's expression hardened. "Private, you're clearly suffering from battle fatigue. Report to the medical tent immediately." But I found myself studying Colin's face more closely. The terror there seemed too specific, too focused to be simple shell shock. His hands trembled as he tried to salute, and I noticed 4 parallel scratches across his forearm that looked too deliberate to be accidental. "Sir," Collins continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "they took Henderson, dragged him into the woods. We heard him screaming for so long, and then silence. Just silence." "That's enough, Private." Blackwood's voice cut through the man's rambling like a blade. "Medical tent, now." As Collins stumbled away, supported by 2 orderlies, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The Major turned back to me, but I caught the brief flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before the mask of command slipped back into place. "Just destroy the bridge and get back alive, Harding," he repeated, but his usual confidence seemed forced. "Whatever you encounter out there, remember you're soldiers first. Trust your training." I nodded and gathered my gear, but Colin's words echoed in my mind. Gray shadows, burning eyes. The way he'd said "they" instead of the Germans or enemy forces. Something about his terror felt genuine, in a way that went beyond normal battlefield fear. The rain continued its skeletal drumming against the canvas as I stepped out into the night to brief my men. Behind me, I heard Major Blackwood pour himself a drink from his private flask. In 3 months of war, I'd never seen him drink on duty. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else, something metallic and wrong that made my skin crawl. Whatever waited for us at that bridge, I had the growing certainty that our training might not be enough. We moved out at 3 a.m. through the desolate wasteland that had once been Belgian countryside. The darkness wrapped around us like a living thing, broken only by the occasional flare that burst overhead, casting everything in stark, dancing shadows before dying away. I led my men in single file along what remained of a farm road, now nothing more than a muddy track between shell craters and the skeletal remains of trees. The usual sounds of war, distant artillery, machine gun chatter, the occasional scream of incoming shells, gradually faded as we moved deeper into no man's land. "This quiet's not natural, sir," Sergeant Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible above the squelch of our boots in the mud. In 20 years of soldiering, he'd developed an instinct for danger that had kept him alive through campaigns most men didn't survive. Battlefields never this silent. He was right. The oppressive quiet seemed to swallow our footsteps, our breathing, even our thoughts. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, that would break the unnatural stillness, but there was nothing. No rats scurrying through the debris, no insects buzzing, not even the distant howl of artillery that had become the constant backdrop to our existence. "Bad omens," Corporal O'Connor muttered behind me, his Irish accent thicker with stress. "Past a dead horse back there with its eyes torn clean out. Nothing natural does that, Lieutenant." "Stow it, O'Connor," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I'd seen the horse too, a massive draft animal that had probably been hauling supplies when it died. But what bothered me wasn't the missing eyes. It was the way the carcass had been positioned, almost deliberately, as if something had arranged it as a warning. Private Thompson tried to lighten the mood with one of his nervous jokes. Maybe the Germans finally learned to keep quiet for once. But his laughter died quickly in the oppressive silence, making him sound more frightened than amused. Private Barnes said nothing, just kept muttering prayers under his breath, while his fingers worked over the beads of his rosary. The soft clicking sound was strangely comforting in the unnatural quiet. As we moved deeper into the contested zone, I began noticing details that made my skin crawl. Animal tracks in the mud, but they were wrong somehow. Too large for any wolf or dog I'd ever seen, with claw marks that suggested something with unusual strength and agility. The tracks seemed to follow our route, paralleling our path before disappearing into the underbrush. "Sir?" Mitchell called softly, kneeling beside a shattered oak tree. "You need to see this." I crouched beside him, examining what had caught his attention. Deep gouges scarred the bark, running from ground level to nearly 8 feet up the trunk. The scratches were too uniform to be shrapnel damage, too deep to be made by any tool I knew. "What kind of animal makes marks like that?" Thompson asked, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. "No animal," O'Connor said flatly. "This is something else, something wrong." I ran my fingers along the gouges, feeling the raw wood beneath. Whatever had made these marks possessed incredible strength. The thought sent ice through my veins, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "German attack dogs, maybe. Enhanced breeds." Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. No dog could reach that high or claw that deep into hardwood. The air itself seemed to thicken as we approached the bridge sector. I could taste something metallic on my tongue. Not quite blood, but close enough to make my stomach turn. The temperature dropped noticeably, despite the morning sun beginning to show through the overcast sky. Our breath began misting in the suddenly frigid air. "Temperature's dropping fast," Mitchell observed, his practical mind trying to find rational explanations. "Weather front moving in, maybe." But I noticed how his hand had moved to rest on his rifle's stock, and how his eyes kept scanning the tree line with the wariness of a man who'd learned to trust his instincts over his logic. Thompson pointed ahead with a shaking finger. "Sir, look at the bridge." Through the morning mist, the railway bridge came into view, and what I saw made no sense. The structure stood intact, its iron framework gleaming as if freshly painted. The rails stretched across the gap without a single break or shell hole. It looked completely untouched by war, but the ground around it told a different story. Deep furrows scarred the earth as if something massive had been dragged through the area repeatedly. Vegetation had been stripped away in long parallel lines that reminded me uncomfortably of claw marks. And everywhere, that unnatural silence pressed down on us like a physical weight. "Jesus Christ," O'Connor whispered, crossing himself. "What happened here?" As if in answer to his question, a sound echoed across the valley, a howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was too deep for any natural throat, too prolonged for any living lung. The sound raised every hair on my body and sent ice through my veins. My men froze, weapons half raised, eyes darting toward shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The howl died away, but its echo seemed to linger in the air, in our bones, in our very souls. What the hell was that? Thompson's voice was barely a whisper. I wished I had an answer. Instead, I checked my watch and noted the time. 0630 hours. We had 6 hours to plant the charges and get clear before the German advance reached this position. 6 hours in a place where something inhuman had left its mark on everything we could see. I led my men down the slope toward the bridge, every sense screaming warnings I couldn't quite articulate. The closer we got, the more wrong everything felt. The railway bridge stood like a monument to impossibility, pristine ironwork rising from foundations that showed no sign of bombardment or sabotage attempts. "This doesn't make sense," Mitchell muttered, his experienced eyes taking in details that confirmed my own growing unease. Every strategic point in this sector's been hit at least once. Why leave the bridge untouched? The rails gleamed in the morning light, unmarked by rust or damage. I knelt and placed my palm against the metal surface, expecting the cold touch of iron. Instead, the rail felt warm, almost alive, with a subtle vibration that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Sir," Thompson called from the eastern support pillar, "you need to see this." I joined him beside the massive wooden beam that anchored the bridge to the riverbank. What I saw made my blood run cold. Deep gouges scarred the hardwood, each furrow as wide as my fist, and carved with such force that wood splinters still clung to the edges. The scratches followed no pattern I could recognize, not the systematic damage of artillery or the random destruction of explosives. These marks looked deliberate, purposeful, as if something had tested the strength of the bridge supports and found them wanting. "Mitchell, examine those charges we found," I ordered, pointing to scattered remnants of what might once have been a demolition attempt. The sergeant picked through the debris with practiced hands. "These were set to blow the eastern support," he reported. "Professional job, too. But something went wrong. Looks like the detonator was torn apart." He held up twisted metal that had once been a standard military detonator. The device looked like it had been ripped open by something with incredible strength and surprising precision. Whatever had destroyed it knew exactly what it was doing. O'Connor knelt beside what remained of military equipment scattered around the bridge approach. A helmet with 4 parallel gouges torn through the steel, a rifle with its stock completely shredded, torn pieces of uniform fabric that told the story of men who had been here before us. "Where are the bodies?" Barnes asked, his voice barely audible. "All this gear, but no bodies." The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Equipment didn't scatter itself. Weapons didn't abandon their users. Men didn't simply vanish, leaving behind only torn clothing and destroyed gear. I picked up a waterlogged field notebook, its pages stuck together with moisture and something darker. The few legible entries made my hands shake. Day 3. Something watching from tree line. Large. Moves without sound. Day 4. Henderson missing. Found his boots by the river, both feet still in them. Day 5. God help us. It's not human, not animal, something else. The entries stopped there, the remaining pages torn out or destroyed. "Lieutenant," Mitchell's voice cut through my growing horror, temperatures dropping again. He was right. Despite the morning sun climbing higher, the air around the bridge had turned frigid. Our breath misted white in the suddenly Arctic air, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces of our equipment. "No birds," Thompson observed, his young voice tight with fear. "No insects. Nothing living wants to be here." The silence pressed down on us with physical weight. In 3 months of war, I'd grown accustomed to the constant background noise of conflict, distant artillery, the buzz of aircraft, the everyday sounds of men and machines at war. Here, that familiar soundtrack had been replaced by something far more disturbing. Absolute quiet. No wind stirred the bare branches. No water trickled beneath the bridge. Even our own movement seemed muffled, as if the very air was absorbing sound before it could travel. "Set up the charges," I ordered, trying to impose military routine on the growing unreality of our situation. Standard demolition pattern. We blow this bridge and get out. But as we began unpacking our equipment, that howl echoed across the valley again. Closer this time. The sound seemed to emerge from the earth itself, vibrating through the bridge supports and into our bones. It was deeper than any wolf, more sustained than any human voice, and it carried an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Barnes dropped his pack and began praying aloud, his voice shaking. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." "Shut it, Private," I snapped, but my own voice betrayed the fear I was trying to suppress. The howl died away, but its echo seemed to linger in the metal framework of the bridge, creating a resonance that made the entire structure hum with ominous harmony. O'Connor crossed himself and muttered something in Gaelic that sounded like a prayer or a curse. Thompson's hands trembled as he handled the explosive charges, and even Mitchell's professional composure had developed visible cracks. "Something's watching us," Mitchell said quietly, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Can't see it, but it's there. Been a soldier too long not to know when you're in someone's sights." I felt it too, that crawling sensation between my shoulder blades that meant hostile eyes were evaluating, measuring, planning. But every time I turned to look directly at the shadows, there was nothing there. Only the sense of presence, malevolent and patient, growing stronger with each passing moment. The howl came again. And this time, we all heard the intelligence behind it. This wasn't the random cry of an animal. It was communication, a signal. And somewhere in the distance, other voices answered. The echo of that inhuman howl died away, but its effect on my men was immediate and devastating. Barnes began praying aloud, his voice shaking with each word. Thompson's hands trembled so badly, he nearly dropped the explosive charge he was positioning. Even Mitchell, with his 20 years of military experience, admitted something I'd never heard from him before. "In 2 decades of soldiering, I've never heard anything like that," he said, his weathered face pale in the morning light. That wasn't made by any throat god intended. The feeling of being watched intensified until it became almost unbearable. Eyes seemed to follow us from every shadow, every broken tree, every patch of disturbed earth. When I looked directly at these spots, I saw nothing, but peripheral vision caught glimpses of something large and gray moving just beyond the edge of clear sight. "There," Thompson whispered, pointing toward a cluster of shell-blasted trees. "Did you see it?" I squinted at the tree line, my finger resting on my rifle's trigger. For just a moment, I thought I saw a shape that was too large to be human, too coordinated to be natural. But when I blinked and looked again, there was only shadow and broken wood. "Just keep working," I ordered, but my own voice sounded hollow. "We plant these charges and get out." Our equipment began failing in ways that defied explanation. O'Connor's compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The radio crackled with static that almost sounded like breathing. Mitchell's reliable pocket watch, which had kept perfect time through 3 months of war, stopped dead at 0647 hours, the exact moment we'd heard that first howl. "Electronics don't just fail like this," Mitchell muttered, tapping his watch face. "Something's interfering with the mechanisms." I tried to maintain command authority while fighting my own growing terror. Every shadow seemed to conceal watching eyes. Every sound of wind through broken branches might be something else moving. The rational part of my mind, the part trained in military tactics and logical thinking, kept insisting there had to be reasonable explanations. The other part, the part that had kept me alive through months of combat, screamed that we were in the presence of something that didn't follow any rules I understood. "Movement," O'Connor called softly, his rifle already raised. 11 o'clock, approximately 200 meters. I followed his sight line and saw something that made my breath catch. A shape moved between the trees with unnatural grace, too large to be a man, too coordinated to be a wild animal. It paused for a moment, and I could swear I saw eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "Take the shot," I ordered. O'Connor's rifle cracked, the sound abnormally loud in the oppressive silence. The shape vanished instantly, but we all heard something that chilled us to the bone, a sound like laughter, deep and rumbling, and definitely not human. "Did I hit it?" O'Connor asked, his voice tight with strain. "Something's wrong with the sound," Thompson said, his young face twisted with confusion. "The echo's all wrong. It's like the forest is eating the noise." He was right. Our voices, our footsteps, even the crack of the rifle shot seemed muffled and distorted. Sound died away too quickly, absorbed by something that shouldn't exist. As we continued setting the charges, we began to realize we weren't dealing with a single threat. The feeling of being observed came from multiple directions. When Mitchell spotted movement to our east, I simultaneously caught a glimpse of something watching from the west. The watchers were coordinating, surrounding us with tactical precision that reminded me uncomfortably of human intelligence. "They're hurting us," Mitchell said, his experienced soldier's instincts recognizing the pattern. "Whatever they are, they're not just watching. They're maneuvering." Barnes, still clutching his prayer book, began muttering about divine punishment and the wages of sin. "This is hell come to earth," he whispered. "God's judgment on the ungodly war we're fighting." "Shut up, Barnes," I snapped. But part of me wondered if the terrified private might be right. What if this was punishment for the mechanized slaughter we'd been participating in? What if the war itself had torn holes in reality, letting something through that didn't belong in our world? The howl came again, closer now, and this time we heard the answer, another voice, equally inhuman, calling from a different direction. Then another, and another. "Jesus Christ," O'Connor whispered, crossing himself. "How many of them are there?" The coordinated calling continued, a network of inhuman voices establishing positions around our location. The tactical implications were terrifying. We were outnumbered by an unknown force that demonstrated intelligence, coordination, and knowledge of our position. "Finish the charges," I ordered, checking my rifle and trying to calculate our odds of fighting our way out. Double time. But as darkness began to fall prematurely under heavy storm clouds, I caught my first clear glimpse of what was hunting us. Through a gap in the tree line, backlit by lightning, I saw a massive shape that defied every natural law I knew. It stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, with the basic structure of a wolf, but wrong in every detail. Too large, too intelligent, too purposeful. Its eyes glowed with phosphorescent fire, and when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth designed for more than killing. They were designed for hunting. It looked directly at me across the distance, and in that moment of eye contact, I felt a recognition that turned my blood to ice. This thing knew me, had been studying me, and it was done waiting. The charges were set, each one precisely placed according to Mitchell's 20 years of demolition experience. The sun had reached its zenith, but the unnatural cold still pressed against us like a living thing. I could see my breath misting as I checked the final connections, my fingers numb despite my gloves. "Detonators ready, sir," Mitchell reported, his voice steady but his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. 2-minute fuse. Should bring down the eastern support clean. The feeling of being watched had grown so intense, I could barely concentrate on the technical details. Every shadow seemed to conceal hostile eyes. Every sound of wind through broken branches might be something else moving through the underbrush. "Thompson," I called, wiping sweat from my forehead despite the cold. "Check the perimeter one more time. We move out in 10 minutes. The young private nodded, shouldering his rifle with hands that trembled slightly. "Yes, sir. Just a quick sweep." I watched him move toward the eastern tree line, his boots splashing through puddles, that reflected nothing but gray sky. Something about his retreating figure filled me with dread, but I couldn't articulate why. He looked so small against the backdrop of devastated landscape. "Don't like splitting up," O'Connor muttered, crossing himself for the third time in as many minutes. "Bad luck to separate when the hounds are hunting." "Stow the superstition, Corporal," I snapped, but my own nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Thompson had been gone less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. That's when we heard it. The scream cut through the oppressive silence like a blade through silk. It was Thompson's voice, but twisted into something I'd never heard from any human throat. Pure terror, given sound. The cry echoed across the valley, bouncing off the bridge supports and the ravine walls, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, abruptly, silence. "Thompson," I shouted, raising my rifle and moving toward where I'd last seen him. But Barnes grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't," he whispered, his face white as bone. "It's what they want. Separate us. Pick us off one by one." I jerked free of his grip, but his words stopped me cold. In the distance, where Thompson had disappeared, I could see his rifle lying abandoned in the mud. Next to it, his boots sat perfectly upright, laces still tied. Both feet were still inside them. The sight hit me like a physical blow. I'd seen men die in every conceivable way during 3 months of war, but this was different. This was wrong in a way that violated everything I understood about violence and death. "Jesus Christ," O'Connor breathed, making the sign of the cross again. "What kind of thing takes a man clean out of his boots?" "Nothing natural," Mitchell said grimly, his rifle already trained on the tree line. His professional composure was cracking, revealing the frightened man beneath. "In 20 years of soldiering, I've never seen anything like that." The silence stretched until I thought I might scream from the tension. Then, from the direction where Thompson had vanished, came a sound that made my blood freeze. Breathing. Deep mechanical breathing that seemed to echo from inside a barrel. "It's still there," Barnes whispered, clutching his prayer book so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Watching us. Waiting." I raised my binoculars with shaking hands and focused on the tree line. For a moment, I saw nothing but shadow and broken branches. Then something moved, and I caught my first clear glimpse of what was hunting us. The creature stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, with the basic structure of a wolf, but wrong in every detail. Its fur was gray as gunmetal, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The muscles beneath rippled with unnatural power as it shifted position, never taking its burning eyes off our location. Those eyes were the worst part. They glowed with phosphorescent fire, but behind that inhuman light, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Intelligence. Purpose. This thing wasn't just hunting us, it was studying us. "Can you see it?" Mitchell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Approximately 200 meters, 11 o'clock. The creature opened its mouth, revealing teeth designed for more than killing. They were designed for tearing, for rending, for inflicting maximum damage on living flesh. When it breathed, I could see vapor rising from its nostrils in the cold air. But it didn't attack. Instead, it began to move, circling our position just beyond rifle range. The intelligence behind its actions was terrifying. It knew exactly how far our weapons could reach. It was testing us, probing our defenses, learning our patterns. "Why doesn't it attack?" Barnes asked, his voice cracking with strain. "Because it's not alone," O'Connor said quietly, his face pale with understanding. "Look around us. Really look." I followed his gaze and felt my heart stop. Through gaps in the underbrush, I caught glimpses of other shapes moving, eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. The soft pad of massive paws on wet earth. We were surrounded. "How many?" Mitchell asked, his rifle tracking movement he couldn't quite see. "At least 3, I replied, my mouth dry as dust. "Maybe more." The mechanical breathing grew louder, more rhythmic. It wasn't the natural panting of an animal. It was too controlled, too deliberate, like the sound of machinery running at optimal efficiency. Barnes had begun praying aloud, his voice shaking with each word. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." "Shut up, Barnes," I hissed, but part of me found comfort in the familiar words. If divine protection existed, we needed it now more than ever. The creature I could see clearly had stopped moving. It stood motionless between 2 shattered trees, watching us with those burning eyes, waiting for something. A signal, perhaps, or maybe just the right moment to begin the final hunt. I checked my watch. 12:47 p.m. We'd been at the bridge for nearly 6 hours, and every minute felt like an eternity. The German advance would reach this sector soon, but I was beginning to doubt we'd live long enough to see enemy soldiers. "We need to move," I said, my voice barely steady. "Complete the mission and get out of here." But even as I spoke the words, I knew we were trapped. The creatures had positioned themselves with tactical precision that reminded me uncomfortably of human intelligence. Every escape route was blocked. Every avenue of retreat was covered. The hunt had begun, and we were the prey. The largest creature, the one I could see most clearly, tilted its massive head as if listening to something beyond our hearing. Then it opened its mouth and released a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The howl was deeper than any natural throat could produce, longer than any living lung could sustain. It seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath our feet, resonating in the iron framework of the bridge until the entire structure hummed with ominous harmony. And from the darkness around us, other voices answered. The answering howls came from every direction, a chorus of inhuman voices that made my skin crawl and my hands shake. I counted at least 5 distinct calls, maybe more. The sound echoed off the ravine walls and the bridge supports until it seemed like the very air was screaming. "Dear God," O'Connor whispered, his Irish accent thick with terror. "It's a whole pack of them." Mitchell's professional training kept him functional, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he tried to count muzzle flashes that weren't there, to apply military tactics to an enemy that followed no rules he understood. "Defensive positions," I ordered, my voice sounding hollow in the aftermath of that hellish chorus. "Use the bridge supports as cover." We scrambled toward the iron framework, our boots slipping on mud that seemed thicker and darker than it should be. The metal felt ice cold through my gloves, but I forced myself to focus on practical concerns. Sight lines, fields of fire, ammunition count, anything to avoid thinking about what was hunting us. Barnes pressed his back against one of the massive support beams, his prayer book clutched in one hand and his rifle in the other. "This is divine punishment," he muttered, his young face twisted with terror and something approaching madness. "God's judgment on the ungodly war we're fighting." "Shut your mouth, Private," I snapped, but his words echoed thoughts I'd been trying to suppress. What if this was judgment? What if the mechanized slaughter we'd been participating in had torn holes in reality itself, letting something through that didn't belong in our world? "Movement," Mitchell called softly, his rifle trained on a gap between 2 fallen trees. 11 o'clock, approximately 150 meters. I followed his sight line and saw a shape that made my breath catch. Gray fur rippled over muscles that seemed too large, too powerful for any earthly predator. The creature moved with fluid grace, testing our perimeter with the systematic approach of a trained soldier. "Take the shot," I whispered. Mitchell's rifle cracked, the sound abnormally loud in the oppressive silence. The shape vanished instantly, but we all heard what followed. A sound like laughter, deep and rumbling, and definitely not human. "Did you hit it?" O'Connor asked, his voice tight with strain. "Something's wrong with the acoustics," Mitchell replied, his weathered face creased with confusion. Bullet should have echoed off the ravine walls. Instead, the sound just died. He was right. The gunshot had been swallowed by the unnatural silence, absorbed by something that shouldn't exist. Even our voices seemed muffled, as if the very air was working against us. "They're not just animals," I said, the realization hitting me like ice water. "Look at how they're moving. Systematic, coordinated. They're using military tactics." As if to prove my point, movement appeared simultaneously from 3 different directions. The creatures were probing our defenses, testing our responses, learning our patterns. When O'Connor fired at one shadow, the others immediately adjusted their approach. "Jesus Christ," the Irishman breathed, lowering his rifle with shaking hands. "They're smarter than we are." The mechanical breathing grew louder, closer. I could smell something now, a metallic scent that wasn't quite blood, wasn't quite machine oil, but contained elements of both. It made my stomach turn and my vision blur at the edges. "Sir," Barnes called from his position near the eastern support. "I found something." He held up a torn piece of fabric that might once have been a German uniform. But the tears in the material were too clean, too precise. They looked almost surgical. "What kind of claws make cuts like that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, O'Connor's Irish accent cut through the tension. "Not claws," he said grimly. "Tools. These things have been modified, enhanced. Someone's been experimenting on them." The thought sent ice through my veins. Not supernatural spirits, but something potentially worse, the products of human experimentation. Men creating monsters for the purposes of war. "Impossible," I said. But even as the word left my mouth, I knew he might be right. The creature's tactical thinking, their mechanical breathing, the surgical precision of their attacks, it all pointed to something that had been deliberately created. A sound from behind made us all turn. One of the creatures had somehow circled around to our rear, moving with absolute silence across ground that should have betrayed any footstep. It stood just beyond our perimeter, watching us with those phosphorescent eyes. This one was larger than the others, nearly the size of a horse but built like a predator. Scars crisscrossed its gray hide, and I could see metal gleaming beneath the fur in places, surgical modifications, enhancements. The creature tilted its massive head, studying us with unnatural intelligence. Then it opened its mouth, revealing teeth that had been sharpened and reinforced with metal caps. When it breathed, I could hear the mechanical wheeze of artificially enhanced lungs. "Mein Gott," a voice said from the darkness beyond the creature. "They are still here." My blood turned to ice. The voice was human, German, and it was speaking to the creatures as if they could understand. A figure stepped into view, a man in a torn German uniform. But something was wrong with his movements, too fluid, too controlled. His eyes reflected light like the creature's, and when he smiled, I saw teeth that had been filed to points. "Dr. Weber's greatest success," the figure continued in accented English, his voice carrying an inhuman quality that made my skin crawl. The perfect fusion of human intelligence and predatory instinct. The truth hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just enhanced animals. They were men. Or had been men, before someone had transformed them into something else entirely. "Kill them all," I whispered, raising my rifle with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. But the human creature just smiled wider, showing those filed teeth. "You cannot kill what is already dead, British soldier. We died on the operating tables in Berlin. What walks now is something improved." The largest creature, the Alpha, let out another of those mechanical howls. This time, the sound seemed to come from its throat and from speakers hidden somewhere in its modified body. The howl was answered by others, but now I could hear the artificial components in their voices. We weren't facing supernatural monsters. We were facing the end result of human experimentation, taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. Science without conscience, progress without humanity. And they were hunting us with the combined intelligence of men and the predatory instincts of wolves. The German thing raised its hand, and the creatures began to move. Not randomly, but with military precision. They had been soldiers once, and they remembered their training. "God help us all," Barnes whispered, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I found myself agreeing with his prayers. We were about to face an enemy that combined the worst aspects of human intelligence with inhuman hunger. And I was beginning to doubt that any of us would live to see another sunrise. The German thing's hand fell, and hell erupted around us. The creatures attacked with military precision, each one moving to predetermined positions with the coordination of a trained unit. But their movements were wrong. Too fast, too fluid, covering ground that should have been impossible, even for enhanced soldiers. "Fire at will!" I shouted, squeezing off rounds at the closest target. My bullet struck the gray hide and punched through, but the creature barely staggered. Black blood leaked from the wounds, but it kept coming with mechanical determination. These things had been built to absorb damage that would drop any normal soldier. Mitchell's rifle barked repeatedly, his 20 years of experience making every shot count. "Aim for the head," he called over the chaos. "Body shots aren't stopping them." O'Connor was praying in rapid-fire Gaelic, while his rifle spoke its own deadly language. I saw one creature stumble as his shot took it in the face, but even that didn't kill it. The thing just shook its massive head and resumed its advance, one eye socket leaking fluid that steamed in the cold air. Barnes had stopped praying and started screaming, not in fear, but in rage. "Abominations!" he shrieked, firing with wild abandon. "Godless abominations!" The largest creature, the Alpha, came straight for me with terrifying intelligence in its burning eyes. I could see the surgical scars beneath its gray fur, the metal reinforcements that had been grafted to its skeleton. This had been a man once, someone's son, perhaps. Now it was something that existed only to kill. I emptied my rifle into its chest and reached for my sidearm. The Alpha stumbled, but didn't fall. Its mechanical breathing grew louder, more labored, but those phosphorescent eyes never left mine. "The charges," I yelled to Mitchell. "Blow the charges!" But Mitchell was fighting for his life against two of the creatures that had flanked his position. His bayonet flashed as he tried to keep them at bay, but I could see him being pushed back toward the ravine edge. The Alpha reached me before I could draw my pistol. Its massive hand, struck my chest with the force of a sledgehammer, sending me flying backward into the iron framework of the bridge. Stars exploded across my vision as my skull struck metal. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard O'Connor scream, not in pain, but in defiant fury. "Come on then, you German bastards. Come and take me." I rolled aside, just as the Alpha's claws, enhanced with metal tips, gouged deep furrows in the ground where my head had been. The creature's face was inches from mine, and I could smell the reek of chemicals and decay on its breath. Its eyes held human intelligence trapped in an inhuman frame. "Mitchell," I called, struggling to my feet. "The detonator." The veteran sergeant looked back at me, his face grim with understanding. 3 creatures surrounded him now, but he held something in his hand, the detonator for our carefully placed charges. "Tell my Mary I died for something worthwhile," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the chaos. Then he smiled and pressed the trigger. The explosion shook the earth beneath us. The eastern support of the bridge disintegrated in a cloud of smoke and debris, sending tons of iron and stone crashing into the ravine below. The shock wave knocked me flat and sent the creatures tumbling. When the smoke cleared, Mitchell was gone. So were 2 of the creatures, lost in the collapse of the bridge section. But the Alpha had survived, and its mechanical breathing had taken on an even more ominous quality. "You killed my pack brother," the German thing said, stepping through the wreckage with unhurried precision. "But no matter. There are more where he came from. Many more." O'Connor was down, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. Barnes had wedged himself between 2 support beams, still firing at anything that moved. We were being systematically destroyed. The Alpha creature fixed its burning gaze on me and began to advance. Each step was deliberate, calculated. It was no longer just hunting. It was savoring the kill. "You want to know the truth, British officer?" the German thing asked, its filed teeth gleaming in the dim light. "Your own side has similar programs. London approved Project Lycanthrope 3 months ago. Soon, both armies will field such soldiers." The revelation hit me like ice water. If he was telling the truth, then this horror wasn't limited to German experimentation. The monsters we'd unleashed would outlive the war itself. I drew my pistol and put 3 rounds center mass into the Alpha's chest. The creature staggered but kept coming. Its artificial enhancements were too extensive, too well designed. "Barnes," I called to the terrified private. "The remaining charges, can you reach them?" Barnes looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, then nodded grimly. He understood what I was asking, what it would cost. "For Thompson," he said simply, and began crawling toward the western supports, where our backup charges were positioned. The Alpha leaped at me with impossible speed. I threw myself aside, but its claws raked across my left arm, tearing through uniform and flesh like paper. The pain was immediate and excruciating, but I forced myself to keep moving. O'Connor appeared beside me, blood streaming down his face, but his rifle steady. "Together then, Lieutenant?" "Together," I agreed. We opened fire simultaneously, both aiming for the creature's head. Our bullets struck home, and this time the Alpha went down hard. But even as it fell, I could see its wounds beginning to close. Whatever had been done to these things, it included accelerated healing. The German thing laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the wreckage. "You cannot kill what has already died once. We are beyond your weapons now." Barnes reached the charges and looked back at us. His young face had aged years in the last few hours, but his resolve was absolute. "Tell them we did our duty," he called. Then he detonated the remaining explosives. The western support collapsed in a thunderous roar of falling stone and twisted metal. The entire bridge structure groaned and began to come apart, massive sections plunging into the ravine below. The sound was deafening, apocalyptic. Barnes vanished in the collapse, along with the German thing and 2 more of the creatures. But the explosion had opened a gap in their lines, a chance for escape. "Move!" I shouted to O'Connor. We ran through the chaos of falling debris, our boots slipping on blood-slicked stone. Behind us, I could hear the alpha creature struggling to its feet, its mechanical breathing now punctuated by sounds of damaged machinery. The bridge was coming apart completely now, sections falling into the ravine in a cascade of destruction. Our mission was complete. No German advance would cross here, but the cost had been everything. O'Connor stumbled and fell. When I turned to help him, I saw the parallel claw marks across his back, deep enough to expose ribs. He was dying. "Go," he gasped, pushing me away with weakening hands. "Someone has to warn them, tell them what's coming." I wanted to argue, to carry him out somehow, but the alpha creature was approaching through the wreckage, and more shapes were moving in the smoke. The surviving creatures were regrouping for a final assault. "I'll tell them," I promised O'Connor. "I'll make them believe." He smiled, blood frothing at his lips. "Sure and you will, Lieutenant. Sure and you will." Then he raised his rifle one last time and began firing at the approaching horrors. I ran. God help me. I left him there and ran through the collapsing bridge structure, through the smoke and falling debris, through the screams of dying monsters and dying men. Behind me, the Alpha's howl echoed across the devastated landscape. Not the cry of an animal, but the mechanical scream of a machine designed for killing. It was a sound that would follow me for the rest of my life. The bridge was gone. The creatures were trapped on the far side of the ravine. But as I stumbled through the darkness toward Allied lines, I could hear other howls in the distance. The German thing had spoken the truth. There were more of them out there. Many more. And if London had approved similar programs, then the horror was just beginning. The war would end someday, but the monsters we'd created would remain. They would outlive us all. I was the sole survivor of what would officially be recorded as a successful demolition mission. But I knew the truth. We hadn't won anything. We'd simply given the monsters more time to breed, to spread, to perfect their unholy fusion of human intelligence and predatory hunger. The war had changed. It was no longer nation against nation, but humanity against the abominations it had created in the name of victory. And I feared we were already losing. I stumbled back to Allied lines 3 days later, my uniform torn and caked with mud that had turned the color of dried blood. The sentries who found me said I looked like a ghost, hollow-eyed, mumbling, clutching my rifle like it was the only real thing left in the world. Maybe it was. The journey back had been a nightmare of its own. Every shadow might hide burning eyes. Every sound of wind through broken trees could be mechanical breathing. I'd walked for hours without seeing another living soul, through a landscape that felt permanently poisoned by what had happened at that bridge. The medical tent smelled of carbolic acid and unwashed bodies, familiar scents that should have been comforting, but now made my stomach turn. The doctor who examined me had kind eyes and gentle hands, but when he asked about my injuries, I couldn't find words that would make him understand. "Battle fatigue," he murmured to his assistant, making notes on his clipboard. "Classic symptoms. Rest and recuperation should help." But rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thompson's empty boots standing in the mud. I heard Mitchell's final words echoing across the collapsed bridge. The taste of cordite and that metallic wrongness lingered on my tongue, no matter how much water I drank. Major Blackwood visited me on the second day. His weathered face showed the strain of too many lost patrols, too many missions that went wrong in ways he couldn't explain. "What happened out there, Harding?" he asked, settling into the chair beside my cot. I tried to tell him. God help me, I tried. But the words came out all wrong. Fragments about gray shadows and burning eyes, about creatures that moved like men, but hunted like wolves, about the mechanical breathing that still echoed in my ears during the long, sleepless nights. German experimental weapons, I finally said, grasping for military language that might make sense. Enhanced guard animals, some kind of breeding program. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not disbelief exactly, more like recognition, as if he'd heard similar reports before. The bridge? He asked. Destroyed, sir. Both supports collapsed. Nothing's crossing that ravine for months. He nodded and made notes in his leather-bound journal. But his hands shook slightly as he wrote, and I noticed how his eyes kept darting toward the tent entrance, as if expecting something to come through it at any moment. You did good work, Lieutenant, he said, standing to leave. Get some rest. That's an order. But as he reached the tent flap, he paused and looked back at me. Harding, those experimental weapons. If you encounter reports of similar incidents, you'll let me know. Unofficially, I nodded, understanding passing between us like a secret handshake. I wasn't the only one who'd brought back stories that didn't fit in official reports. Somewhere in the vast machine of war, other men were fighting battles that couldn't be acknowledged, facing enemies that shouldn't exist. The taste of metal on my tongue grew stronger as I watched him leave. Outside, artillery rumbled in the distance, the familiar sound of conventional war. But underneath it, carried on the wind, I could swear I heard something else, something that sounded almost like howling. 6 months later, I found myself stationed near Verdun, assigned to a quiet sector where nothing ever happened. The official reason was recuperation duty, a reward for good service and a chance to recover from battle fatigue. The unofficial reason was that nobody knew what else to do with an officer who filed reports about German monster programs. But quiet sectors have a way of becoming active when you least expect it. It started with the same signs I'd learned to recognize. Patrols going missing without explanation. Equipment found abandoned with deep claw marks torn through steel. The unnatural silence that pressed down like a physical weight, as if the very air was holding its breath. You hear about the Dubois Patrol? Corporal Henderson asked during morning inspection. His nervous eyes reminded me uncomfortably of Thompson's. Found their camp yesterday. Tents shredded, gear scattered, but no bodies. I felt ice form in my stomach. Any tracks? That's the strange part, sir. Tracks were there, but they were wrong. Too big, too deep, like something heavy as a horse but built like a wolf. The familiar metallic taste returned to my mouth. I'd hoped the nightmare was over, contained to that one bridge in Belgium. But hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. That night, I received an unofficial visit from Captain Morrison, an intelligence officer I'd never met. He slipped into my quarters after lights out, moving with the practiced silence of a man who specialized in conversations that never happened. Lieutenant Harding, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I've read your reports, the official ones and the others. He produced a manila folder thick with documents. In the lamplight, I could see photographs, witness statements, technical drawings that made my skin crawl. The images showed creatures that were familiar and wrong at the same time. The same gray fur, the same burning eyes, but different in subtle ways. Evolved. You're not alone in this, Morrison continued. We have reports from 17 different sectors, similar encounters, similar entities. The German program is more extensive than we initially believed. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But that's not why I'm here, Harding. We've discovered something else, something that makes your bridge encounter look like a training exercise. The folder contained a single photograph that made my hands shake. It showed a facility hidden deep in the Argonne forest, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. But the guards weren't human. They stood upright on two legs, wore military uniforms, but their faces were wrong, wolf-like, intelligent. They're not just creating soldiers anymore, Morrison said. They're creating a new species, one that can think, plan, organize, one that can breed. I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred. How many? Conservative estimate? Several hundred, possibly more. He closed the folder and stood to leave. We're assembling a special unit. Men who've encountered these things and lived. Men who know what we're really fighting. After he left, I sat alone in my quarters, staring at the shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, the familiar sounds of war continued. Artillery fire, marching feet, the mundane noise of human conflict. But underneath it all, if I listened carefully, I could hear something else. The sound of evolution, of humanity's chickens coming home to roost. I opened my writing kit and began a new report. Not for the official files, but for whoever might read it after I was gone. Because I had the growing certainty that the war we thought we were fighting was already over. The war we were actually fighting was just beginning. And I feared we were already losing. The howls were getting closer every night. Sometimes I couldn't tell if they came from outside my window or from inside my own dreams. The line between nightmare and reality had blurred beyond recognition, and I no longer trusted my own senses to tell me which was which. But one thing remained clear. The monsters we'd created in the name of victory would outlive us all. They were patient, intelligent, and growing stronger with each passing day. Somewhere in the darkness beyond my window, gray shapes moved with mechanical precision. The hunt was far from over. It was just beginning.